The ships came on a Tuesday morning. Billions of people around the world stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky. The vessels were massive beyond understanding. Each one was larger than a city. They blocked out the sun and cast shadows that stretched across entire countries. The year was 2089, and humanity was about to learn that they were not alone in the universe. The aliens called themselves the Galactic Council. They were an assembly of 12 different species who had ruled this part of the galaxy for thousands of years. They had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had enslaved dozens of species. And now, they had come for Earth. The war lasted only 3 weeks. Humanity fought with everything they had. Every nation united for the first and last time. Soldiers fired missiles at ships that shrugged them off like raindrops. Fighter jets attacked vessels that moved faster than anything humans had ever built. Nuclear weapons were launched in desperation, but the alien shields absorbed them without a scratch. 3 weeks. That was all it took for the most advanced civilization humanity had ever known to crush every military on Earth. The leader of the conquest was Ambassador of the. He was a tall creature with scales like polished emeralds and eyes that held no warmth. They were one of the oldest species in the council, and they viewed themselves as the natural rulers of lesser beings. When looked at humans, he saw nothing but useful animals. He announced the terms of surrender from the steps of the United Nations building. His voice was cold and matter-of-fact, like a farmer explaining rules to his livestock. Earth would become a tributary world. All weapons would be confiscated. All military forces would be disbanded. Humans would be forbidden from traveling beyond their own moon. Every year, Earth would send resources to the Council: metals, food, water, and workers. In exchange, the Council would allow humanity to continue existing. They called it integration. Humanity called it slavery. The first decade was the hardest. People who resisted were made into examples. Cities that rebelled were destroyed from orbit. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones were taken away to work in mines on distant planets. The message was clear: obey or suffer. Ambassador established his headquarters in what had once been Geneva. He filled the halls with officials who looked at humans with the same expression people might give to insects. They studied humanity with scientific curiosity, poking and prodding at human culture like children examining a strange bug. Their conclusion was not flattering. The Council's scientists declared that humans were an inferior species. They pointed to human history, the wars, the genocides, the environmental destruction, as proof that humans could not be trusted with power. They noted that humans lived short lives, rarely more than 100 years, while most council species lived for centuries. They observed that humans were emotional, irrational, and prone to fighting among themselves. The official report stated, humans are a short-lived, emotionally unstable species prone to self-destruction. With proper management, they may prove useful as laborers. Left to their own devices, they will likely destroy themselves within a few generations. They pose no long-term threat to council interests. Ambassador read this report and smiled. He had conquered many worlds, and this one would be no different. Give the humans a few generations under council rule, and they would forget they had ever been free. Their children would grow up knowing only submission. They would not even understand what freedom meant. He was certain of this, completely certain. And he was completely wrong. The resistance began in small ways. A scientist who aliened data files before they were locked away. An engineer who memorized the design of an alien device before it was taken apart. A hacker who found tiny gaps in the Council's communication network and quietly exploited them. These people found each other in the shadows. They met in abandoned subway tunnels and forgotten basements. They shared what they knew and made plans for a future that seemed impossible. They called themselves the Prometheus Collective, named after the ancient god who stole fire from heaven and gave it to humanity. Was 17 years old when her father was taken. He was an engineer, one of the best on Earth. The council decided they needed his skills on a mining station orbiting a distant star, watched as soldiers dragged him from their home in Tokyo. He looked back at her one last time, and she saw something in his eyes that she would never forget. It was not despair. It was a command, a silent order that said, "Survive, learn, and never forget what they have done to us." Obeyed. She was 32 when she joined the Prometheus Collective. By then, she had spent 15 years studying everything she could about the Council and their technology. She had learned their languages, their history, their weaknesses. She had become exactly what her father had wanted her to become, a weapon waiting to be used. The collective welcomed her. They had been waiting for people like her, people with fire in their hearts and ice in their veins, people who could smile at their oppressors during the day and plot their destruction at night. Years passed. The council grew comfortable. They saw a population that worked without complaint, that bowed when ordered, that seemed to have accepted its place in the galaxy. Their surveillance systems reported nothing unusual. Their informants heard no whispers of rebellion. They did not see the factories hidden in mountain caves, building weapons from stolen designs. They did not detect the messages passing through communication channels they thought were secure. They did not notice the thousands of humans who had been quietly placed in positions throughout the galaxy, waiting for a signal that had not yet been given. 63 years after the conquest, Ambassador looked out at the planet he ruled and felt satisfaction. Earth was a model tributary world, efficient, productive, obedient. He had proven that even the most troublesome species could be broken with enough time and pressure. He had no idea that beneath his feet, in tunnels he did not know existed, Commander was meeting with the leaders of a resistance that spanned the entire galaxy. He had no idea that humanity had not been broken. They had been waiting. And their time was almost here. The announcement came without warning. Every screen on Earth flickered at the same moment. Every radio station went silent. Every device that could receive a signal displayed the same image. Ambassador standing in his grand hall, surrounded by council officials, preparing to deliver a message that would change everything. "Citizens of Earth," he began, his translated voice flat and emotionless. "The Galactic Council has reviewed the status of your world. Your population has grown beyond efficient levels. Resources that should flow to the Council are instead being consumed by excess humans." He paused, letting his words sink in. To correct this inefficiency, the Council has approved the Harvest Protocol. Over the next 5 years, 3 billion humans will be relocated to labor colonies throughout Council space. Selection will begin immediately. Those chosen should consider this an honor. They will serve the greater good of galactic civilization. The transmission ended. For a moment there was silence across the planet. Then the screaming began. 3 billion people, half the population of Earth. Families would be torn apart. Children would be separated from parents. Entire communities would be erased. And the council spoke of it as casually as someone might discuss moving furniture. In the tunnels beneath Geneva, Commander watched the announcement with the other leaders of the Prometheus Collective. No one spoke for a long time. The weight of what they had just heard pressed down on them like a physical force. General Stone was the first to break the silence. He was an old man now, his hair white and his face lined with decades of hidden anger. His father had been one of the first resistance fighters, killed in the early days of the occupation, had spent his entire life preparing for a moment that he sometimes feared would never come. "They have finally done it," he said quietly. "They have finally pushed too far." Doctor nodded. She was the collective's chief scientist, a genius who had spent 30 years secretly studying council technology. Her greatest achievement was hidden in a cave in the mountains of Kenya, a faster-than-light drive that surpassed anything the council possessed, built from scraps and powered by human brilliance. "If we are going to act," she said, It must be now. The harvest protocol will begin in 6 months. Once they start moving people off-world, our network will be destroyed. Wei pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy. He was the collective's master hacker, a man who had mapped every weakness in the Council's vast communication network. Red dots appeared across the display, thousands of them, scattered across hundreds of star systems. Our people are in position, he said. Sleeper agents on every major Council world, hidden weapons caches on every human labor colony, ships disguised as mining vessels, ready to be converted into warships. We have been preparing for this moment for 60 years. Commander looked at each of them in turn. These were the people who had kept hope alive when hope seemed foolish. They had worked in secret, sacrificed everything, and asked for nothing in return except the chance, just the chance, to strike back at those who had stolen their world. She thought of her father. She thought of the look in his eyes as he was dragged away. She thought of the millions of humans who had suffered and died under Council rule, never knowing that their sacrifices were building toward something greater. "We vote," she said simply. One by one they raised their hands. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Every hand went up. "Then it is decided," said. "Operation Prometheus Rising begins now. The next 2 years were the most dangerous in human history." On the surface, nothing changed. Humans continued to work, to obey, to bow before their masters. The Council saw exactly what they expected to see, a broken species accepting its fate. But beneath the surface, everything was changing. In the asteroid mines beyond Mars, human workers quietly modified their mining vessels during night shifts. They removed the safety limiters, installed weapons systems disguised as drilling equipment, and reinforced the hulls with stolen military-grade plating. The Council inspectors never noticed. Why would they? These were just simple laborers doing simple work. On Earth, factories that officially produced farming equipment were actually building pulse rifles and plasma cannons. The real products were hidden in secret compartments beneath the factory floors, then smuggled out through tunnels that did not appear on any map. Doctor's team worked around the clock to produce more Icarus drives. Each one was a marvel of engineering, capable of moving a ship faster than any Council vessel. The Council had spent centuries perfecting their FTL technology. Humans had studied it for decades and then made it better, because that was what humans did. They took things apart, figured out how they worked, and improved them. Wei's hackers planted viruses in Council systems that would lie dormant until activated. They created communication channels that were invisible to Council surveillance. They built a network that connected every human in the galaxy, ready to spring into action at a single command. The Council noticed nothing. Their own arrogance blinded them. They had studied human history and seen only weakness. They had watched humans fight among themselves and concluded that they could never unite against an external enemy. They had measured human and decided that such short-lived creatures could never think in terms of decades or centuries. They did not understand that oppression was the greatest unifier in the universe. They did not realize that every human who had ever been beaten, humiliated, or separated from their family had become a soldier in an invisible army. They could not imagine that a species they dismissed as primitive was capable of patience, planning, and sacrifice on a scale they had never encountered. 6 months before the harvest protocol was set to begin, the preparations were complete. Commander reviewed the final reports in the same tunnel where Operation Prometheus Rising had been approved. 4,000 warships hidden throughout the galaxy. 8 billion humans ready to fight. Weapons and supplies stockpiled on every world where humans lived. She thought about what was coming. She knew that many people would die. She knew that even if they won, the cost would be terrible. But she also knew that some things were worth any price. Freedom was one of them. She recorded a message that would be broadcast to every human in the galaxy at the moment of attack. She kept it simple, because the message needed to reach everyone, the old and the young, the educated and the illiterate, those who had been free once and those who had been born into chains. "Remember who we are," she said, looking directly into the camera. "Remember what they took. Tonight we take it back." The countdown began. In 6 hours, the galaxy would learn what humanity was truly capable of. The Council had no idea what was coming. But they were about to find out. The final hours before the attack were the longest of life. She sat alone in her quarters, a small room carved out of rock deep beneath the Earth's surface. On her desk was a photograph, the only one she had of her father. It was old and faded, taken when she was just a child, long before the Council came. In the picture, her father was smiling, holding her on his shoulders while cherry blossoms fell around them. She had not seen him in over 30 years. She did not know if he was alive or dead. The Council kept no records of individual workers. They were just numbers to be used and discarded. But tonight, she would make them pay for every number. Around the galaxy, 4,000 ships prepared for war. The crews knew that many of them would not survive the night. They wrote letters to loved ones they might never see again. They said prayers to gods of 100 different faiths. They checked their weapons one last time and waited for the signal. In the asteroid mines of the outer solar system, Captain David stood on the bridge of what had once been a simple mining vessel. Now it was a warship, armed with weapons the Council did not know existed. His crew was a mix of miners, engineers, and former soldiers who had waited decades for this moment. "How are we looking?" he asked his first officer. "All systems ready," she replied. "The Icarus drive is charged, weapons are online, the crew is prepared." Nodded, he looked out at the blackness of space and thought about his grandmother, who had been alive during the invasion. She had told him stories of the old days, when humans could go wherever they wanted, when the sky was not a cage. She had died hoping that someday her would know that freedom. Tonight, he would try to make her dream come true. On Earth, the Resistance had placed agents in every major city. They had weapons hidden in basements, in warehouses, in places the Council would never think to look. They had trained in secret for years, preparing for a battle that most believed would never come. Maria Santos was one of them. She was a cook in the kitchen of Ambassador's headquarters in Geneva. Every day for 15 years, she had prepared meals for the creature who ruled her world. She had smiled at him, bowed to him, called him master, while hatred burned in her heart. Tonight she would stop pretending. Hidden in her quarters was a pulse rifle and enough explosives to destroy the building's power generators. When the signal came, she would move. Thousands of others like her would move at the same moment. The Council would wake up to find their entire infrastructure under attack from the inside. The clock showed 3 hours until the operation began. On Council Prime, the center of galactic government, everything was quiet. The 12 counselors slept peacefully in their chambers, dreaming of empires and conquest. Their guards patrolled the halls with the lazy confidence of soldiers who had never known real danger. Their defense systems hummed along, monitoring a galaxy that they believed was completely under control. They did not know that Way's viruses were already inside those systems, waiting to wake up. They did not know that human agents had memorized every patrol route, every security code, every weakness in their defenses. They did not know that in a few hours, their world would be turned upside down. The Council's greatest weakness was their certainty. They had ruled for 10,000 years. They had conquered hundreds of species. They had never encountered anything that truly threatened them, so they stopped imagining that such a threat could exist. Humans had no such luxury. They had grown up knowing that danger could come at any moment. They had evolved on a planet where survival required constant alertness. They had learned, over millions of years of evolution, to always be ready for the unexpected. Now they would teach the Council a lesson that the galaxy would never forget. 2 hours before the attack, Commander gathered her senior officers for a final briefing. The room was full of people who had given their lives to this cause. General Stone, whose father had died fighting the invasion. Doctor, who had spent 30 years building the technology that would give them a chance. Wei, who had turned the Council's own systems into weapons. And dozens of others, soldiers, scientists, hackers, engineers, all of them burning with the same fire. "In 2 hours we change the galaxy," said. "Everything we have worked for, everything we have sacrificed comes down to this moment. There will be no second chances. If we fail tonight, humanity is finished." She paused, looking at each face in turn. "But we will not fail, because we have something the Council has never understood. We have hope. We have unity. We have 63 years of anger waiting to be released." She stood up, her voice growing stronger. "The Council thinks we are animals. They think we are slaves. They think we have accepted our chains. Tonight we show them how wrong they are. Tonight we remind them that humans do not stay down. We get back up. We fight. And we win." The room erupted in cheers. 1 hour before the attack, silence fell across the human resistance. In ships scattered across the galaxy, crews stood at their stations, waiting. On planets and space stations throughout Council space, agents held their weapons and watched the clock. On Earth, 8 billion people, most of whom had no idea what was about to happen, went about their final moments of life under alien rule. Commander sat alone, watching the seconds tick away. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. This was the moment she had been born for, the moment her father had ordered her to survive for. She thought about all the humans who had died under Council rule, the workers who had been worked to death in alien mines, the families who had been torn apart, the children who had grown up never knowing freedom. Every one of them deserved justice. The clock reached 0, pressed a single button, sending a signal that raced across the galaxy at faster than light speed. And everywhere, all at once, humanity rose up. On Earth, explosions rocked Council installations. In space, 4,000 warships appeared from nowhere, their Icarus drives carrying them into battle faster than the Council thought possible. On Council Prime, alarms screamed as systems crashed and human agents emerged from hiding to strike at the heart of galactic power. The war for humanity's freedom had begun. And the Galactic Council was about to learn the true meaning of fear. Ambassador was asleep when his world ended. The first explosion shook his bed. The second brought him to his feet. By the third, alarms were screaming throughout his headquarters and his guards were pounding on his door. "What is happening?" he demanded as he rushed into the corridor. "The humans," a guard said, his voice trembling with something he had never heard before, fear. "They are attacking, everywhere, all at once." Could not believe what he was hearing. It was impossible. The humans were broken. They had been broken for 63 years. They had no weapons, no ships, no way to. An explosion ripped through the floor below them. The lights flickered and died, replaced by dim red emergency lighting. Through the windows, could see fires burning across Geneva. "Get me to the command center," he ordered. "Now." In space above Earth, Captain David watched the Council fleet scramble to respond to an attack they had never imagined possible. His ship, the Phoenix, was one of 200 human vessels that had jumped directly into Earth orbit. The Council had 3,000 ships stationed there, more than enough to crush any normal rebellion. But this was not a normal rebellion. "All ships engage," said calmly. The Phoenix opened fire. The human weapons were devastating. Doctor's team had not just Council technology, they had improved it. Where Council pulse cannons fired once per second, human versions fired 3 times. Where Council shields could absorb 100 hits, human weapons found the tiny gaps between shield frequencies and punched through. Council ships began to explode. On the bridge of the Council flagship, Admiral of the species watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart. They were warriors, proud and ancient. They had never lost a battle in 3,000 years. They were losing now. "How is this possible?" demanded. "These are humans. They have no technology, no training, no." A human ship appeared directly in front of his vessel, emerging from FTL so close that could see the individual weapons ports. That was impossible. No ship could jump with such precision. The Council's best navigators needed miles of safety margin. Humans apparently did not. The ship fired. Admiral had just enough time to realize that everything he believed about humans was wrong before his flagship exploded. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated. On mining colony Epsilon 7, human workers who had spent years pretending to be broken rose up with weapons they had hidden for decades. They overwhelmed the guards, seized the command center, and sent a message to the approaching Council reinforcements: turn back or be destroyed. The Council ships did not turn back. They had never turned back from a human threat before. They did now. On the pleasure world of Velar Prime, where wealthy Council citizens vacationed while humans served their every need, the servants suddenly stopped serving. Hidden weapons appeared. Security systems that should have protected the elite instead locked them in their rooms. Within hours, the humans controlled the entire planet. On transport ships carrying human workers to distant labor camps, the workers revealed themselves to be trained soldiers. They took control of the ships and turned them around. Everywhere, all at once, humanity was taking back its freedom. But the most important battle was happening on Council Prime itself. General Stone led the assault on the Council chambers. He was 73 years old, his body weakened by age and decades of stress. He should have been in a command center somewhere, directing the battle from safety. Instead, he was first through the door. The Council chambers were a vast hall of gleaming metal and ancient stone. For 10,000 years, the 12 most powerful beings in the galaxy had gathered here to decide the fate of billions. Statues of their ancestors lined the walls, watching with cold eyes as the first human soldiers in history entered this sacred space. The 12 counselors were there, surrounded by their guards. They had been awakened from their beds and brought here when the attack began. Now they stood in their sleeping clothes, watching with disbelief as humans invaded their most protected sanctuary. Stone's soldiers made quick work of the guards. They were good fighters, but they had never faced an enemy who truly wanted to kill them. They had never known what it felt like to have nothing to lose. Within minutes, it was over. General Stone stood before the 12 counselors, his weapon raised. Behind him, his soldiers secured the room. Outside, the sounds of battle continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The council had fallen. "Do you know who I am?" Stone asked quietly. The counselors stared at him. One of them, a creature with skin like blue crystal, tried to speak with authority. "You are a criminal, a terrorist. When the Council fleet arrives, you will." "The Council fleet is currently being destroyed," Stone interrupted, "along with your armies, your bases, and your empire. But that is not what I asked. I asked if you know who I am." Silence. "My name is Stone. My father was Thomas Stone. He was one of the first to resist your invasion. Your soldiers killed him in front of my mother and me. I was 8 years old." Stone stepped closer. "For 65 years, I have waited for this moment. I have trained, planned, and sacrificed everything for the chance to stand where I am standing now." He lowered his weapon. "I could kill you all. It would be easy. It would be satisfying, and no one would blame me." The counselors tensed, waiting for death. "But I am not going to kill you. Do you know why?" He looked at each of them in turn. "Because I want you to live. I want you to watch as your empire crumbles. I want you to see humans, the species you dismissed as animals, rebuild everything you destroyed. I want you to spend the rest of your long lives knowing that you were beaten by creatures you thought were beneath you." He smiled, and there was no warmth in it. That will hurt far more than death. Commander arrived at the council chambers 3 hours later, when the last resistance had been crushed and the battle was won. She walked through halls that had never known human footsteps. She passed statues of ancient counselors who had conquered worlds and enslaved billions. She felt the weight of history pressing down on her, not just human history, but the history of a galaxy that had believed certain things were impossible. Today, humans had proven them wrong. She found the 12 counselors under guard, still in their sleeping clothes, still unable to believe what had happened. When she entered, they looked up at her with expressions she had never seen on their faces before. Fear. Real, genuine fear of a human being. Said nothing for a long moment. She simply looked at them, letting them feel what billions of humans had felt for 63 years. Helplessness in the presence of a power they could not resist. Finally she spoke. "You studied us," she said quietly. "You analyzed us. You wrote reports about our weaknesses, but you made one mistake. You never asked what made us survive, what made us climb down from the trees and spread across our world, what made us look at every obstacle and find a way around it." She stepped closer. "It was not our strength. It was not our intelligence. It was our refusal to accept that anything is impossible. You told us we were inferior. We did not believe you. You told us we were beaten. We proved you wrong." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the creature who had ruled Earth for 63 years. "You should have killed us when you had the chance." The battle for the galaxy was over. Now came the hard part, building a new one. The days after the uprising were chaos. Council forces across the galaxy did not surrender easily. Some fought to the death, unable to accept that they had been beaten by a species they considered inferior. Others tried to regroup, hoping to launch counterattacks that would restore the old order. A few attempted to flee to the edges of known space, where they thought humanity could not follow. They were wrong about that too. Human ships, powered by Icarus drives that made Council technology look primitive, hunted down every attempt at resistance. It took 3 months to secure full control of Council space. 3 months of battles, negotiations, and difficult choices. But in the end, humanity won. The Treaty of New Geneva was signed on a cold morning in December 2155. Exactly 66 years after the first Council ships appeared in Earth's sky. The ceremony took place in the same building where Ambassador had announced the terms of humanity's surrender. Now, the tables were turned. Human diplomats sat in positions of power, while representatives of the 12 Council species waited nervously to learn their fate. Commander, now President of the United Earth Government, stood at the center of the room. She was 70 years old, her hair gray, her face lined with the weight of everything she had seen and done. But her eyes were still sharp, still burning with the fire that had carried her through 6 decades of resistance. She looked at the gathered representatives and felt something strange. Not hatred, but a kind of tired satisfaction. They had done it. Against all odds, against every prediction, against the combined might of a galactic empire, humanity had won. "Let us begin," she said. The treaty was comprehensive. Earth and all human colonies would be fully independent. No tribute, no restrictions, no oversight. Humans would have the right to travel freely throughout the galaxy and to settle any unclaimed world they found. But that was not all. "The Council system of tributary worlds ends today," announced. "Every species that was enslaved or exploited under Council rule will be offered the same freedoms we have claimed for ourselves: independence, self-governance, and the right to determine their own future." A murmur went through the Council representatives. This was more than they had expected. Most conquering species would have simply replaced the old masters with themselves. Humanity was offering something different, a galaxy based on cooperation instead of domination. The representative, A nervous young official who had replaced Ambassador raised a trembling hand. "And what of us? What of the species who were part of the council? What is our fate?" Considered the question. She thought of all the suffering the council had caused, the billions of lives destroyed, the cultures erased, the families torn apart. Part of her, a small, dark part, wanted to make them pay for every crime, wanted to do to them what they had done to humanity. But she was not them, that was the point. "You will not be punished collectively for the actions of your governments," she said. "Individual war criminals will face justice, but ordinary citizens will not be harmed. Your species will be offered the same choice as everyone else. Join us as equals in building a new galactic order, or go your own way in peace." The relief on their faces was visible. They had expected vengeance. They received mercy instead. Not because humanity was weak, because humanity chose to be better than its enemies. The treaty was signed an hour later. As the representatives filed out, General Stone approached. He looked tired, they all looked tired, but there was a peace in his eyes that she had never seen before. "We did it," he said simply. "Yes," she replied, "we did. My father would have been proud." Nodded, "So would mine." They stood in silence for a moment, thinking of all the people who had sacrificed everything for this day. The resistance fighters who had died in the early years, the scientists who had worked themselves to death creating the technology that gave humanity a chance, the ordinary people who had kept hope alive when hope seemed foolish. This victory belonged to all of them. Earth rebuilt quickly. Humans were good at rebuilding. They had done it countless times throughout their history. Cities that had been damaged in the uprising were restored. Families that had been separated were reunited. The scars of 66 years of occupation slowly began to heal. But some scars were too deep to fully heal. President spent the remaining years of her life working to create a galaxy that was different from the one she had grown up in. She established the Galactic Assembly, a body where every species had an equal voice. She created exchange programs so that young people from different worlds could learn from each other. She pushed for laws that protected the rights of all beings, regardless of their species or the length of their. Not everyone agreed with her choices. Some humans wanted revenge. Some wanted to build their own empire. Some thought the council species deserved to suffer as humanity had suffered. Understood their anger. She shared it in some ways. But she also knew that revenge would only lead to more revenge, and empire would only lead to more resistance. The cycle of conquest and rebellion had gone on for thousands of years. Someone had to break it. She chose to make humanity that someone. The day before she died, at the age of 93, gave her final public address. She spoke from the balcony of the presidential palace in Geneva, looking out at a crowd of millions, humans and aliens alike, gathered to hear her words. "I have lived long enough to see the impossible become possible," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "I have seen humanity rise from slavery to freedom, from despair to hope, from a conquered species to a leader among the stars." She paused, looking out at the faces below. "They thought our short lives made us weak. They were wrong. Our short lives make every moment precious, every injustice unbearable, every freedom worth dying for." She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had found peace at last. "We are not a patient species. We do not wait for better days. We make them. That is who we are. That is who we have always been. And that is who we will always be." She died in her sleep that night, surrounded by friends and family. The entire galaxy mourned her passing. On 100 worlds, people who had never met her shed tears for the woman who had led humanity from darkness into light. In the years that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The old hierarchies crumbled. New partnerships formed. Species that had been enemies learned to work together. It was not perfect. Nothing involving living beings ever is, but it was better than what had come before. and at the center of it all were the humans, the species that the Council had dismissed as primitive, the short-lived creatures who were supposed to accept their chains and fade quietly into history, the clever animals who had turned out to be the most dangerous force the galaxy had ever known. They spread across the stars, bringing their energy, their creativity, and their stubborn refusal to accept limits wherever they went. They built new worlds and new wonders. They pushed the boundaries of science and art and philosophy. They made mistakes and learned from them. They argued and fought and made up and moved forward. They lived. And the Galactic Council, which had ruled unchallenged for 10,000 years, became a footnote in the history books, a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimating the species that refused to stay down. A statue of Commander was erected in Geneva, on the exact spot where the Council had announced humanity's subjugation. On the base of the statue were carved the words she had spoken on the night of the uprising.